Resident Evil Requiem to this video is the newest release in the Resident Evil franchise, with its big selling point being the two protagonist setup, this time with new protagonist Grace and new returning character Leon S. Kennedy, trying to have a combination of having the horror aspects and the action aspects the franchise has come to be known for, although I would say the balance isn't quite there, but I'll get more into that. This game is also as many would say, a massive love letter to the franchise, with many callbacks and references to previous entries. Although I would say it goes from leveling callback to flat out shameless at points with the references it chooses to have. But if you've played other entries, you will be happy seeing certain things that show up in this game, even if they're just minor things. Our main premise is that Grace, an FBI analyst, ends up being assigned to investigate the Redwood Hotel, which is not only the site where her mother was killed years ago, but also because Raccoon City survivors are now just mysteriously passing away, and the FBI of course wants to know what's going on. But while investigating the hotel, she ends up being attacked by a stalker named Victor Gideon, who ends up kidnapping her for mysterious reasons. That's when we come in our second protagonist, Leon Kennedy, who is also investigating what's going on to Raccoon City survivors and appears to be showing signs of some kind of illness himself. So we have our two goals of Grace now being in danger and being civically pursued, and Leon not only trying to investigate what's going on, but also possibly find a cure for what's currently ailing him as well, while also trying to find Grace in the process. Grace gets taken to the Rhodes Hill Corner Care Center and tries to escape, and ends up coming across Leon. Leon ends up giving her the Requiem gun, and thus our adventure is set with Grace trying to figure out what's going on, how to escape, and Leon being captured by Victor Gideon, although not really for long. This game just gets to the point very fast with the story of what's going on, and try to get the player into the action of what's going on, or more so, the horror of what's going on and everything. Especially like the fact that you have a brief bit with Leon, where he's trying to pursue Victor kidnapping Grace, and you have this segment in the street where you are able to save the civilians who are being attacked by the zombies in the street. I do like the bit that you do have the opportunity to save the civilians. Does it really matter in the grand scheme of things? No, but it is a cool detail that you do have the opportunity to do so, as well as functioning as Leon's tutorial section and everything when it comes to that. I also like the fact that when it comes to this game's direction, more so than I got the player, they actually use the color yellow again, but in more clever ways when it comes to stuff like whether it be item boxes or police tape and stuff like that. Sometimes it feels more natural to the world of the game to help get your attention as well, but not be as overly blatant as thing like, let's say, Resident Evil 4 Remake. For the most part, I do enjoy Resident Evil Requiem's narrative. It's more so in the latter half of the game, especially the final third, where some of the stuff in the narrative becomes too ridiculous. I know that sounds crazy for terms of Resident Evil, but I mean more the case of the stuff they want to call back to and try and retcon feels so ridiculous, especially with the timeline of events when it comes to this franchise, to the point where certain moments that are meant to be sweet feel incredibly insincere if you are aware of the previous entries and what has to happen in this franchise. There is also one moment for Grace and Leon in this narrative that is a case of me just going, what are you doing? And they're both separate moments far from from each other, but it still feels weird that the characters do certain things. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, the easy one is the one for Leon early on, where he tries to fight Victor, but for some reason tries to close the gap despite using a gun. And I only mention this in the issue because they really want to hammer in the idea that Leon is way more experienced in this entry, being way older, having gone through the previous entries. So him making such a rookie mistake feels weird that, Leon, you're using a long-range weapon. Why are you closing the distance? Overall, I do like the narrative of Resident Evil Requiem. There's just stuff in the later half that I just don't believe, and certain ideas that are brought up, but then just quickly tossed aside and not really further built upon. But I will say, like I said, if you have played other entries, you will find fun little nods and callbacks to them. I just wish that some things weren't so blatant case of we put this in here for a reference to nothing else. Now for the gameplay, with you being able to pick between first person and third person, all the developers up front recommend that you play as Grace in first person and Leon in third person. Not to listen to developers, but this is the way I played it, so I decided to go with what developers kind of intended for its gameplay experience, but the game does have natural transitions regardless of what kind of perspective you pick, which is a very nice detail that neither side gets slack. So you prefer third person, you'll be good. For first person for both, you'll also be good. Grace's segments is where the horror comes in, with Grace being completely inexperienced to handle a zombie outbreak. She's of course way more afraid, and her gameplay relies more on stealth, trying to avoid enemies. Even the pistol she eventually gets is used more as a defensive tool because of how much ammo it takes to actually take out the enemies. So her gun is used more for a stun the enemies and run, and even her melee attack in quotation marks is just her pushing the enemy. But it is also very useful because pushing enemies also knocks over other enemies nearby, so I do like her melee attack still being very good in that sense. Grace can also find these knives to use as a get off me tool if they're grabbed, although it's pretty inconsistent when you're allowed to use it, because there's many times where I get grabbed and the prompt to use the knife just never pops up. So I don't know if it's a certain type of grab that has to happen or something, because a lot of the times it just won't go out. I just end up taking the damage as I'm using the knife. And I do like the fact that for some of the knife animations, Grace ends up plunging the knife into the enemy. So you want that knife back, you're gonna have to get it back from the enemy you plunged it into. The zombies this time around retain an aspect of personality, making them more unique and fun opponents to deal with, since you can find other ways to try and distract them, like one zombie that's fixated on turning off all the lights because it's the policy of the locale they're in, and stuff like that. So it does make going against zombies interesting, and there are some zombies who have incompatible personalities, like one zombie that hates loud noise, so you were to, let's say, throw an empty bottle at a zombie, it will rush over and smack the thing, possibly killing it because of its hatred of loud noise. But that circumstance is very specific, because there was a point where I got a singer zombie who's loudly singing next to a zombie that hates noise, and they didn't interact at all. Like, I know it's supposed to be like trying an idea that, oh, the singer zombie is helping the zombies in some way, shape, or form, but it is still annoying that here's a loud singing zombie, and the zombie that hates noise and attacks anything that makes a sound just completely ignores it. And I just spent a good while trying to get this set up to work, just for the game to say, no, it won't work, screw you. The zombies are now also able to patrol larger areas without even being able to leave the rooms they're in and just patrol the hallway, making them more of a threat since their locale can just completely change depending on where you lure them to. And that is a fun aspect, although it does get annoying eventually. We're just trying to cross around to do stuff, and a zombie that you had a containment has left containment because it decided to just open a door and walk out. My biggest issue with Grace's gameplay is the pursuer enemies and how much the game uses the mechanic, where early on there is a massive pursuer enemy that you have to avoid, with the only way you're able to fend it off being with light that burns the enemy. But early on, they show Leon defeating the enemy, and I was like, oh, cool, we're done with that. Only for this game to just keep introducing more pursuer enemies, some of which you actually can kill if you have the resources, which is a very cool detail, I like that. But they still bring back more immortal pursuer enemies, and this gets annoying because at a certain point, pursuer enemies aren't scary, they're just a nuisance that you have to wait for them to move until you can actually go back to playing the game. And I hope that the zombies this time around all basically function as pursuer enemies, since they now patrol certain areas and can just leave the rooms they're in. meaning Grace's entire gameplay is filled with the idea of practically everything she goes against is a pursuer enemy, which means the type of horror they're going for starts to become very one-note. Grace's sections are fun, and where most of the game's puzzles end up happening when it comes to Evil Requiem, but it's just the fact that I wish they had more going on than just making every enemy into a pursuer enemy, and I wish they didn't use the big immortal pursuer enemy, shoot this thing to stun them only and then run kind of thing, because the enemy's immortal. Like I said, there's not much you can do aside from just wait for them to leave, and it stops being scary very fast. It just becomes a nuisance. Not help that they've been doing this mechanic a lot in recent Resident Evil games, but that's beside the point. Leon's segments are where the game decides to go full action, and in this case, Leon just being completely prepared for what's going on, being in juxtaposition from Grace's perspective, where Leon just effortlessly takes out the zombies and keeps on moving, including this time having a hatchet instead of a knife they can use not only to parry attacks, but to also have the ability to finish off enemies or do weak attacks and strong attacks with your knife, making it a very good tool to really be using, on top of being able to do extra damage to boss fights whenever they're in a down position. Early on, Leon's gameplay sections are pretty limited, with him getting only a small amount of screen time to really do anything when you're playing as him, but it is fun having him be in segments that you did earlier as Grace that probably took way longer to navigate through because of her gameplay, and not be able to just effortlessly deal with the issue as Leon, and getting control of Grace again, and being from the entire locale just completely cleared out because of Leon. Or maybe as Grace, you cleared out way more than Leon could possibly do in that segment, and it is a very cool aspect when it comes to the switching perspective of this game. However, as enjoyable as Leon's gameplay is, Leon's gameplay, I said, is action and does at points get very ridiculous with its action. Like the kind of stuff that people complain about Resident Evil 5 and 6 about, there is that kind of stuff here and everything. I'll just say this, if the action focus of entry Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6 turned you off, then Leon's massive segment later will also do the same, because it's just full-on action, forgoing any idea of horror aside from the fact of the enemies themselves being a horror aspect. But it's one of those things where the action starts getting increasingly ridiculous. How ridiculous? Here is Leon Kennedy driving a motorcycle up a building. Have fun with that knowledge. In Leon's big segment, you start gaining the ability to get points for the enemies you kill, and then spend those points on upgrades, highlighting the shift in action focus for Leon. Hell, this game also lets you play the game with ink ribbons and limited save system, calling back to earlier Resident Evil games. But honestly, this mode feels kind of slapped in because it only really affects Grace. Leon always has autosaves, and when you're in Leon's big segments, his saves are free. Grace is the only one that needs ink ribbons, and since you can actually craft ink ribbons in this game, it means the issue of needing to find ink ribbons to save your game becomes a non-issue very fast. So it's one of those things where you can see the game's balance start slipping. But because Leon is the action character, his set pieces are also action-based. So you didn't like the action-based aspects of Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6, then you won't like it here. I enjoy Resident Evil 4, 5, and aspects of 6, so these action set pieces are pretty cool, especially one that involves having to shoot glass from underneath the feet of zombies or get them to fall, but making sure you don't end up falling yourself. It is very cool and creative set pieces. It's just the fact that it has really shown the Resident Evil fan base's hypocrisy, where people clap for this game's action, but still bash Resident Evil 5. The hypocrisy has been noted. The boss fights in this game are handled by Leon, he's the action person, and the boss fights in this game aren't really that great. There's one boss fight that will now haunt my dreams because the mofos put a giant spider in this game, solely because of Resident Evil 1 reference and nothing else. But I have to say, the way they handle this is creative, even if I have arachnophobia and you're a dick for doing it. But the other boss fights in this game just aren't that great. They're entertaining to go through, but they're just, the boss fights in this game are not exactly the game's strong suit, because despite how much stuff Leon can do, there's just not much they have the boss can really do to counter him, especially with the improved parry system and the fact that Leon can just pretty much fix the hatchet for free, thanks to him always carrying around an object to pretty much just repairs their ability. So stuff like that didn't really feel thought through of how powerful Leon is, and because Grace is meant to be the more weaker aspect, she ends up just having to use pure stealth and doesn't really fight something, she just avoids it. There is also a crafting mechanic for both characters, and with the fact that Grace's crafting requires having to find and collect blood, and the fact you have to hold on a button means that it does take time and leave Grace vulnerable as she does it, but there is so much blood to find for Grace that it makes any sort of scarcity or ammo resources fly out the window, because you always have enough resources to do whatever the hell you want. Leon, having nearly a full inventory size out from the get-go, because he's the action character, means the concept of him running out of things from scarcity is a laughable idea, especially later on with the point system, where he can just buy whatever he wants at that point because of the mechanic. There's also this one segment as Grace where I almost soft-locked the game because I was struggling to get through it, because it was a locale that I already finished, but there's some resources in it, so I want to go back for it, exhibiting some biblical levels of greed. And the game really punished me because despite the fact that you can go back into this specific room after you're done with it, it's not really designed for it, so I wish there was a way where they just blocked it off entirely, rather than potentially getting stuck, because you can go back, but the game does not want you to go back to this locale, so I had to fiddle a line in order to get unstuck from that locale. And reminder, I was using the ink ribbon option of Standard Classic, meaning I really could not afford to get soft locked in this room and have to redo that progress. Now for the game's text, which off the bat, you can immediately fully customize, like increase the size, you can add a background to it, you can remove the subtitles, you even like them, you can even increase the size of the HUD as well. And you can also change the color of the subtitle text itself, and also change the color of the speaker, even having subtitles for more of the ambient sounds as well if you want that. So there are many options. And what does specifically focus only on the subtitles, I feel like they did a very good job here. It's even better than the last one they did, RE4 Remake, so I just really like the customization features they've been adding when it comes to subtitles in these games, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you. Even though tutorial prompts are also big and always have a little backdrop behind them to make the white text be able to stand out from the background going on, so even they're easier to read, especially when there are moments that the game does have to tell you something immediately on the spot in order to do something. So once again, very well done, and I like it a lot how they handled the text. There is the fact that when you get a new file, the text on the right is like very tiny, it says file obtained, but since you are reading the file in question, I feel like that's fine since you're already looking at it and everything. Overall, I do think Resident Evil Requiem is a great game and a great entry in the Resident Evil franchise. Just the fact that certain aspects of the gameplay, because they don't really feel like they evolve, ends up start becoming samey at a certain point and can potentially outstay their welcome. Grace's gameplay is fun, but it also feels like I've been doing this kind of gameplay ever since the release of Resident Evil 7. And Grace's locales, the places she goes to, ends up lifting up her gameplay and making certain mechanics really work and shine, but the fact that the locales at that point are doing the heavy lifting for Grace's gameplay, so there's not a whole lot she can do. Same thing for Leon, where his action gameplay has been refined, feels way better to do, although Leon himself feels very weighty in this game and feels like he takes a bit to turn and move around. Not sure if there's a third person aspect or just his overall character feeling, so it feels a bit weird, but his action gameplay has been refined, feels better than ever, but the opponents don't really stand a chance against Leon, so it's one of those things where they don't really have much to throw at him. Hell, the biggest thing they throw at him are dudes with guns. And when I said the word dude with guns in a Resident Evil game, once again it highlights how action as hell Leon gets, and this game's getting praised for doing stuff Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6 could get bashed for. Well, not 4, people like 4, but 5 and 6 got bashed for. I do enjoy the story of Resident Evil Requiem. There's just certain retcons and stuff they try to do that feels so insincere that I'm surprised someone actually wrote this in the game and thought people would actually believe these certain aspects, and it makes me question what they're gonna do with the eventual Resident Evil 5 remake that we know they're making, even if I would prefer it if they didn't. But that's just the one chance they set up being inevitability. There's also a villain character that's introduced, but they don't do much with, if anything at all. So I wish more was done for that character and everything. Either way, this is still a great title. I'm just not as in love with Evil Requiem as a lot of people are. And I do enjoy its action pieces, but also, like I said, I enjoy Resident Evil 4, 5, and aspects of 6, so I'm being consistent liking it. People who praise the action aspects of this game but don't like those games, those people confuse me. But overall, game is great. That's all I gotta say about it. Alrighty then, good day.